Hello board game brothers and sisters, I'm Adam Singer and welcome to another episode where I'll be letting you know of all the board games launching on Kickstarter and Gamefound over the next week. But before I get started, I do like to go over some news and announcements I just found out about. And the first one is that a Terreria game is actually going to be launching next week on May 28th, so if you are interested in the IP or if you just want to check it out, feel free to come back to my video next week because I will be going into a lot more detail during the week of its launch. But other than that, we do have the next game announced. This one's called Avalon and they don't have a release date yet, but I imagine it will be coming a bit later this year. And this is actually going to be an Arthurian area control game, which sounds really interesting to me, especially since they did such a great job with Oathsworn. I'm really interested to see their take on a more traditional genre, especially one that I really enjoy. And for all of you that missed out on Agemonia, they're actually going to be returning to Kickstarter with a new Heroes expansion, and this is a campaign game that I thought looked like a lot of fun. It is one that I backed, but I haven't had a chance to get it to the table yet just because I got 7th Citadel first, and I've been playing through that. But it seems like everyone else who's been playing this game has been absolutely loving it, and I was very confident in this one when I originally backed it, so I'm really excited to get it to the table as well, and I am excited for the new content. And we just had an announcement for the 40th anniversary collection for Jim Henson's Labyrinth, the board game. And this campaign page doesn't say a whole lot on it, but of course it will be including the original game and all existing expansions. And then also they are going to be adding a new humongous expansion, revising the rulebook, and adding a bunch of exclusives to the campaign as well. I've actually never played this one and I'm not too familiar with the IP either, but I do know this is going to be a great way to get yourself a David Bowie miniature. And finally, launching in Q3, we do have an announcement for Western Legends Story, which is going to be adding a bunch of little adventures that players will be able to go through and make different decisions in order to interact with the world and create a overarching story specific to them. If you're looking for Red Dead Redemption, the board game, this is probably going to get you pretty close. And the base game has a really nice 7.6 on Boardgame Geek and is rated 279th of all time. I do also like to make a quick mention to Alex over at Boardgame Co. because him and I do work together keeping track of all these campaigns so that I can bring you these videos every single week. But if you are looking for more content like this, you'll definitely want to check out his channel because he puts up a video at the start of each month letting you know of the heavy hitters for that month. He also offers a ton of other content as well, going into previews and reviews and often covering games that are just about to launch as well. So definitely check him out and give him a subscribe if you do like his content. But if you are looking for even more games, specifically in the historical wargame genre, there are a bunch of different outlets that release crowdfunded games in this genre. And I don't cover all of them, so you'll definitely want to check out Zilla Blitz because this is his area of specialty and he will give you all the info and details that you need to know about those games. And that's it for an intro, and I will definitely be backing some games this week, so just a warning to hang on to your wallets, but with that said, let's check them out. And the first campaign we have launches on May 20th, and this one is called Mythlords Classic Monsters, and this is a competitive area control game and deck building game where players are going to be deploying different units, fighting the other players, and trying to take control over different locations. But the way this game works is that each player is going to be choosing a commander from one of the 4 supernatural factions, and then each faction is going to have its own sanctum where players are going to be keeping track of their health and victory points, but it's also where they're going to be building up their armies and equipping them before sending them out to battle. There's going to be a bunch of different units that players can draw from their deck, and each of these could have different stats for their health and their strength as well as their power generation, which is the currency used to pay for other cards or potential actions throughout the game. But they could each have different skills and keywords that might interact with skills in different ways, as well as a passive power and a power that you'll have to trigger either through a certain event or by paying in order to activate it. Not a whole lot more info on this one at the time of me filming this video, but the players will be deploying their units, trying to take control over the different location cards and trying to defeat their opponents, because the player who's able to gain the most victory points from doing all that is going to be the winner of the game. And if you want to learn more about this one, I will have it linked in the description down below. Also launching on the 20th, we have Stupor Mundi, and this one is a competitive game where players are going to be trying to build their own personal castles, but then collectively building a shared castle as well. Each player is going to have a bunch of different action cards that they're going to be using throughout the game to take various actions, but then each player is also going to have their own personal player board where they're going to be building up their own castles to earn victory points, but then also gaining special abilities or upgrades depending on what parts of your castle that you decide to build, because building towers is going to allow you to hold more ally cards, building more walls will allow you to store more resources, and then finally building the keeps will aid in managing your action cards. Each player is also going to have their own ship out on the shipboard, which is going to allow them to gain access to all sorts of new cards and abilities, because you can gain advanced action cards here with new actions that you can take advantage of. You can also gain new ally cards here as well, and the ally cards are a way for you to score victory points throughout or at the end of the game, because these cards could gain you victory points based on the construction of your castle, or maybe the construction of the shared castle, or even gaining victory points based on the differences between them. But the other reason that players will want to have their ship at certain locations out on the shipboard is because each of the locations also offers different trading opportunities so that you can exchange your resources for other resources that you might need more, or even trade them for victory points or cards or different actions. But the way that this game plays is that it plays over a series of rounds, and every round players are going to be able to optionally move their ship out on the shipboard, and then each player is going to be drawing a hand of cards. Players will then go in alternating order, playing just one card at a time in order to perform that action. And these actions can allow you to do all sorts of different things, like gain different types of resources, pay to build different parts of your castle or the shared castle by spending those resources, draw additional cards, or even promote your specialists, which is going to move them up these different tiles here, gaining you different upgrades and abilities as the game goes on. Something that's really neat here is the amount of decisions that you actually get to make on these promotion boards, because you'll be able to send multiple of your specialists down a single path if you want, and there are also branching paths along the way. So depending on what you want to activate and your strategy and the different types of ally cards you might have, you might want to go down a different path or even send multiple of your specialists down the same path. But the possibilities of the action cards don't end there, because each of them are also dual use, because rather than spending an action card for its ability, you can actually slot it into the bottom of your own personal player board, and that's going to allow you to perform one of the two actions associated with the icons that it's touching. And this is a great way to take advantage of the current location of your ship out on the shipboard, because you'll be able to perform all the different actions of your ship through this board, and you'll also be able to gain access to the build action for your castle, or even actions that gain you specializations or bonuses for other actions that you take in the game. The game continues like this over a series of rounds, and the end of the game is going to be triggered once a castle is completed, or once certain cards or tiles run out and they can't be replenished. But if you are interested in this one, definitely check it out, and I will have it linked in the description down below. And launch on the 21st, we have Rebirth, and this one's exciting because it's actually our Discord pick of the week, which we haven't had for weeks now because no one has just been able to beat that NG. And I am a little surprised that this was the one to break the streak, because this isn't a massive, expansive game with a ton of hype around it. This one's actually a pretty light tile placement game, but it is the next game coming from Reiner Knizia, and I think regardless of all of that, the fact that this is still the Discord pick of the week does speak wonders for the game and the confidence in the designer, who has proven himself again and again. But as I said, this one's a competitive tile placement game, and the way that this game works is that players are going to be taking turns drawing a tile from their own personal supply and then placing it on any of the empty spaces out on the board. A fun mechanism here is that some of the tile locations have different icons on them, which will prioritize certain tiles, which means that you can only place a tile of a certain type in that space unless there's no other valid placements for that tile. Then you can just choose amongst them. But then there's also other places that you can place any tile into, but you will gain bonus victory points if you do place a particular tile there. There's also spaces with castles on them, and the player that has the most of their colored tiles surrounding that castle is going to be able to swap it out with a castle matching their color, which is going to be earning them victory points at the end of the game. And then there are also these cathedral spaces, and this is going to allow players to gain special cards whenever they're able to put their tile adjacent to that space. These cards are really nice because they grant additional opportunities to score victory points, because they're going to have different conditions on them, and if you're able to complete those conditions, then you'll earn those victory points at the end of the game. But anytime that a player puts a tile out on the board, they're going to be scoring that tile immediately, and there's really just two different types of tiles offered in this game. There are the farm tiles, which come as energy farms and food farms, and then there are the settlement tiles. And the way that you score the farm tiles is that anytime that a player puts one out, they're going to be gaining victory points equal to the number of connected matching farms that also match their color. The way the settlement tiles work is that each of them is going to have a value based on the number of icons on that tile, and anytime that you just put a lone settlement tile out onto the board, you're going to be gaining victory points equal to the number of icons on that tile. But these tiles can be connected to opponents' tiles, and whenever that happens, it's only the player that has the highest amount of icons in that group that's going to be the one to gain the victory points. In this case, also going to be getting a set amount of victory points depending on the amount of tiles in that group. That's pretty much all there is to the game. Players are just going to be taking turns drawing a tile and then placing it out on the board, trying to control certain areas in order to score the most victory points at the end of the game. As always, if you're interested in this one, I will have it linked down below, and you can click that notify me button to get notified once it launches. Also launching on the 21st, we have Backpack Panda, and this one is a team-based deduction card game where no one really knows who is on their side because there's going to be a few different role cards offered in this game. There is the Dark Panda, and then there are the Light Panda, and then there could be a number of Infected Panda depending on player count. But these role cards are all going to be paired with a resource, with the exception of the Dark Panda, who's going to get paired with a Infected card, and then each of those pairs of cards are going to be randomly dealt to each of the players. Game plays up to 6 rounds, and the Light Panda win if they're able to locate and kill the Dark Panda, but the Dark Pandas win if that 6th round is completed. Players also have the opportunity to add tokens to Essential board and also add cards into their backpack, and the cards and tokens do come in Light and Dark, and either team could win the game early if one of their members gets enough cards in their backpack and tokens in the central board matching their color. But during a round, players are going to be taking turns drawing 2 resource cards and 1 effect card into their hand, and they're going to be choosing one of those resource cards to reveal face up on your own personal player board, and then you're going to be choosing another card to put face down on one of the other players. Once all of this is done, each player is going to decide whether to accept or reject both of the cards on their board. If they accept, they're going to be looking at that face down card and then adding both of their cards into their backpack. But if that face down card was an infect card, then they're going to be joining the Dark Pandas team. If they chose to reject the cards, then they're going to be discarding both of them without looking at the face down card. But they're also going to be adding a token to the central board depending on what that face-up card was. This could result in a light, dark, or kill token being added to the central board. During this time, players can also use one of their effect cards to do all sorts of different abilities, like looking at the top 2 cards of another player's backpack, or even manipulating the location of various cards, or making a card act like a different card. Players are going to be trying to get certain types of cards into their backpack, not only to win the game, but also to try and kill the other players, because if a player has 5 of the same type of resource in their backpack, they can discard those cards to issue a kill on another player, but this can only happen after round 3. The kill tokens in the central board also act as a shared wild resource, so if you don't have enough of a particular resource in your backpack, you can also discard those tokens from the central board to issue that kill. When a player is killed, they reveal their character card, but they don't reveal anything from their backpack. Then the game continues like this until either player wins by getting enough tokens and cards into their backpack, or by killing the Dark Panda, or by getting to the end of that 6th round. Check out the campaign in the description down below. Also on the 21st, we have a big box edition of Village Pillage, and this is also going to be including a brand new expansion, but you'll also be able to get the core game and the existing expansions as well. But if you're not familiar with this game, this is a competitive game where players are going to be building up a village, which is represented by the cards that you have in your hand. And then players are going to be spending turnips to buy new and more powerful cards, and also to try and buy relics, because the first player to buy the 3 different types of relics wins the game. This is a game that plays over a series of rounds, and each round players are going to be choosing 2 cards from their hand, and then putting one face down to the left of them and one face down to the right of them. And these cards are going to correlate to the player on your left and your right. All the cards are going to be revealed and then resolved in the initiative order, with the same initiative value being activated simultaneously. But these cards can allow you to grow, gain, or steal turnips from the other players, bank turnips into your own personal board in order to hide them away from the other players and prevent stealing, or even allow you to buy new cards. Each effect on a card is also going to be associated with different icons, and that effect is only going to activate if the opposing card is also of a type that matches that icon. And you might have already noticed that at its core, this game is a take-that game, and I'm normally not a huge fan of those, but I really don't mind the way that this game does it. It actually does look like a lot of fun. I really like that all the players start with the same 4 cards, so everybody knows exactly what everyone else has. And also it's up to you to decide how much you want to push your luck, and if you'd rather spend a turn banking turnips into your bank to protect them, or spending a turn to purchase another card to make you a little bit different and more powerful than the other players. players, and you'll want to read the other players' strategy so you can get an idea of what they're trying to do and hopefully predict the cards that they're going to be playing against you. But the game just continues like this until a player is able to purchase those 3 different relics, and then they win the game. And if you want to check this one out, I will have it linked in the description down below. Also launching on May 21st, we have Monster Mosh Pit, and this one is a competitive set collection game where all the players start with 5 cards in their hand, but then there's going to be 5 cards revealed out on the table to form what's known as the crowd. On a turn, you'll be able to draw cards from the crowd, from the deck, or from the discard pile until you have 6 cards in your hand. The whole goal here is to try and get cards of values in sequential order of the same suit to create a run, because on your turn, you'll be able to cash in one of those runs in order to score its victory points, but then you can also spend an effect card in order to help yourself or harm your opponents. You'll then have the option to discard any of the remaining cards in your hand, but then the game continues like this with players taking turns drawing up to a hand of 6 cards, and then using those cards to try and create sequential sets to score victory points, and the player with the most victory points at the end of the game wins the game. And if you want to check this one out, I will have it linked in the description down below. Also launching on the 21st, we have KUGO, and this one's a really interesting one because this is actually a dexterity game system. It's going to be providing you with all the components that you need to set up all sorts of different games and have all sorts of different modes of play. There are your target-based games, which come in a whole bunch of different flavors, where maybe you're trying to flick your disc into different cups, or maybe you're trying to land on a target, or even get into a goal, or even trying to knock over physical targets that you might put out into the play area. But of course, this system really shines when you start getting creative with it, because you can add all sorts of different ramps and walls and obstacles, and you could add in all sorts of different rules into the game where you might need to rebound, catapult over, or avoid certain components, or maybe even gain bonus points for taking a more risky trick shot. But aside from the target-based games, you also have your KO or versus style games where maybe you're trying to eliminate all your opponent's pieces by knocking them out of the play area. But in this example, players each also have a home base, and if you're able to hit your opponent's home base, then that's going to allow you to get one of your pieces back. Then there's all sorts of other versus modes as well, where maybe you're not trying to eliminate their discs, but rather than just trying to knock off all of your opponent's pins before they knock over yours. And of course, with these, you can also introduce all sorts of obstacles and ramps and walls to catapult over in order to amp up the difficulty. But there will be a bunch of these games pre-made and provided in the rulebook if you are looking for something a little bit more structured and you're not much of the creative type. But the possibilities are nearly endless with this one, and if you do want to check it out, I will have it linked in the description down below. Also launching on May 21st, we have Ironwood, and this one is a really interesting one for a few reasons. First off, this one is an area control game, but it is also a duel because this one was designed for 1 to 2 players, which is something that I don't really see too often with area control games. But secondly, this game is being published by Mindclash Games, which always does a fantastic job with the presentation of their games, but they also have a history of making games more on the heavy side. And what's interesting about this one is that this one isn't that heavy. And I'll even go out on a limb here and say that this one is the least complex of all of their games. But I do just want to be clear that I'm not saying that this is a light game, but by looking at the rules and how the game plays, I think this one is in line with what you would expect from a lot of other popular games in a genre. I love area control games, and 2-player games are the games that I get to the table the most, so naturally I am very interested in this one. But on top of all of that, I have already read the rulebook, and I think the gameplay for this one looks like a ton of fun. And also, since this is being published by Mindclash Games, I already know that the production on this is going to be absolutely fantastic, which I do appreciate. And for all of those reasons, this one is going to be my own personal pick of the week. And like I said, this one is a dueling area control game, but each player is also going to be playing as their own unique faction. There is the nature-based woodwalkers that start in the forest and remain there for the entirety of the game. But then they also have some special tools like their vision cards, which you're going to be using in order to locate your totems out on the map. But in order to win the game, you not only need to find those totems, but you also need to secure them by bringing them back to the outer forest. Then we have the industrial-based Ironclad, and just like the Woodwalkers remain in the forest for the entirety of the game, the Ironclad remain in the mountains. They also have some special tools like a drill that they can use to mine for crystals, which is a currency used in the game. But their goal of the game is to spend those crystals in order to build foundations to eventually turn into forges, and then build 3 forges in order to win the game. But whichever faction you play as, you're going to be taking their faction board along with their starter cards and deck of cards and all of their unique fighter units. And the way that the cards work for each of the factions is that you're going to have 3 starter cards that always come back to you at the start of each round, no matter how much you've used them. But then you're going to have a faction deck of cards, which you'll be drawing from periodically. And the cards there are normally one-time use and get discarded immediately after you've enacted their effects. But some of them can have ongoing effects as well and may last for a period of rounds. These cards are the main way that you're going to be performing your actions throughout the game, but something that's really cool about them is that each of the cards are dual use, so if you choose to use them for their action, you'll just be able to do the ability outlined on that card, but if they're used in combat, each of these cards is going to have an amount of damage, defense, and dominance, which you'll be using to determine the winner of that battle. But the game's played over a series of rounds where at the start of each round, each player is going to be gaining a certain amount of crystals. The Woodwalkers just gain 1, whereas the Ironclad are going to gain 2. Players will then draw 2 cards from their faction deck to add into their hand, and then always starting with the Woodwalker, players are going to be playing 3 cards alternating back and forth. And these cards are going to be offering you a variety of different actions and abilities, but some of the more basic actions offered on these cards are to move your units around out on the board, and anytime that you are moving a Woodwalker, they always move individually, whereas the Ironclad can move as groups. There's also actions that could allow you to draw even more cards from your deck in order to give you more options on your turn, and of course, depending on your faction, there might be actions that allow you to draw specific cards, like the vision cards for the Woodwalkers, or in the case of the Ironclad, you might have cards that allow you to move your drill around on the board or build up those forges. In order to attack another player, you do need to be adjacent to them, and you also need to play a card that allows you to attack. And each time you do that, both players are going to have the option to wager a card from their hand into the battle, essentially adding the strength, defense, and dominance of that card onto their side of the battle when it comes to resolving and determining the winner. The way that works is that you're going to be comparing the overall strength and the overall defense of each side, and this could be modified by different units and effects currently going on in the game, but each player is going to be removing a unit for each amount of damage that gets through, and the player that has units left is going to be the winner of that battle, often getting special effects outlined on their card. But if both players survive, then you're going to be resorting to the dominance values, and whichever player has the highest dominance wins the battle, and if that is still a tie, then it's the attacker who wins. But once both players have played all their cards for the round, then each player is going to be able to spend crystals in order to purchase additional units to deploy out on the board. But the game continues like this over a series of rounds until a player is able to trigger their win condition. And like I said, for the Ironclad, their goal is to build 3 forges. And in order to do that, they need to control a specific mountain and then play the appropriate card there in order to build a foundation and then a forge on top of it, paying whatever associated costs need to be paid. But then the forges do also act as new spawn points for new units, and they do add additional damage in combat, so there are some benefits to having those forges out early in the game. The Woodwalkers need to discover their 3 totems using their vision cards, and each vision card is going to have a specific mountain specified, and if that mountain is not controlled by the enemy and you're adjacent to that mountain, then you can play a card with a discover action in order to reveal your vision card and then place a totem on your fighters that were adjacent to that mountain. But finding that totem is only half the battle because you still need to secure it by moving it back to your home forest. And in order to do that, you'll be carrying it with your units, and you can pass it off from one group of units to another. But you do want to do this quickly because at the end of every round, every totem you have out on the board that's not secured is going to fade. And you're going to be losing that totem if it fades completely, or also if your troop that's carrying it is defeated by the enemy. I really like what I'm seeing with this one, and it does look like a ton of fun, so if you're interested in it as well, you can go ahead and find a link to the page in the description below, and you can follow along to get notified once it launches. Also launching on the 21st, we have How to Save a World, and I'm just going to start out by saying that this one is also my own personal pick of the week, and I have a few reasons for that, but the biggest one is that I have already played this game. I was lucky enough to play this one at a convention, and I was taught by the designer himself, and I'm also just really impressed with this one because this is a first first-time designer, and I think the game that he came up with is not only a ton of fun, but also offers something different than a lot of other worker placement Euro games out there. Not only that, but I also absolutely love the theme on this one, because in this game, players are different scientists competing to stop an asteroid before it hits the planet. And there are different ways that you can try and stop this asteroid. You could either destroy it with a laser, build a shield to deflect it, or just let the asteroid hit the planet and focus on evacuation. There's going to be different project tracks for each of these, and the progress that you make up that track is your contribution to that specific project. You'll be gaining all sorts of bonuses and victory points just for simply moving up any of these tracks, but if you also happen to make a significant investment in the actual project that ends up stopping the asteroid, then that can also gain you a bunch of victory points at the end of the game as well. Another layer on top of this that took me by surprise and I thought was a really cool mechanism in this game is that the way that you check the success of each of these projects is in a particular order. So first you're going to be checking the success of the laser, and if it fails, then you're going to be checking the success of the shield. But if the laser did enough damage, it could actually weaken the asteroid, making the shield's chance of success even easier. But then if neither of those succeed, then it's going to be up to the evacuation. But like I said, this one is a worker placement game, but something that's neat about this is that all your workers are always out on the board because they're either going to be located on the planet or located on the moon. Depending on where that worker is located, it's only going to have access to the worker location spots at that location. Some of the actions will have an icon on them indicating that when you use that action, it will automatically send you to the other side of the board, but players can freely do this as well if they do have the energy to spend in order to do it. But these aren't the only actions that players can take on their turn, because each player will also be able to purchase cards throughout the game, and cards can be used once per round, and there's 3 different types of cards that you can gain. There's action cards, which can give you additional actions on your turn, but then there are the boost cards, which will augment certain actions that you take, and then there are cards that just give you different criteria for additional victory points and endgame scoring at the end of the game. Alternatively, some of these cards do also have different icons on them, and during your turn, instead of using it for its boost or its action, you can choose to discard it in order to gain the resources on that card. The different actions available out on the board will allow you to do all sorts of different things, like even purchase these cards, but one thing to note when doing that is that the cost of your next card does increase depending on the number of cards that you currently have in possession. But the other actions you can perform are to gain resources of different types, or even gain different tokens that act sort of like reusable resources, but then you can also invest in the various tracks to move you up that specific project track. But players will also have their own personal player boards, and they can use actions to interact with those boards in order to purchase various upgrades. And the upgrades could allow you to pay less resources for other actions, gain victory points for meeting certain requirements or taking certain actions. But one of the most important things you can do on your player board is to increase these 5 tracks located on the left-hand side of your board, because each of these tracks is going to correlate with one of the different types of resources in the game. And the higher that track is, the more of that resource you're going to be gaining for free at the start of each round. And one thing to note about the different action spaces out on the board is that a lot of these locations are blocking, which means that if someone has already taken that location, then you're not allowed to go there. And this is important to note because this means that you will probably want to prioritize the board actions before you take your card actions, because like I said, players do take turns performing one action, and if you choose to do a card action before placing your meeple out on a location, someone might take that location before you. Of course, this may not always be the most optimal strategy, and that's where a lot of the really fun decisions come into play in this game, because you might want to play one of your action cards first in order to put you in a better position for your next action, but that is a risk that you might have to take. Once all the players have performed all the actions they're able to perform, you're going to be moving into the end of the round, where the asteroid is always going to be moving forward 1 space and then activating any icons on that space. And it's at this point that you're going to be determining the progress on the various projects, as well as any additional progress on the asteroid track. Because something I didn't mention yet is that this game does also incorporate a bit of shared bag building, because you're going to be starting with a bag with a bunch of asteroid cubes in it, and as the asteroid moves over different icons on this track, that could add even more into the bag. Luckily, anytime that a player moves up any of those 3 project tracks, a token of that color is also going to get put into that bag, and then at the end of the round, a number of tokens are going to be drawn from that bag, depending on which round that it is. If you draw a project cube, then it's going to get added to the project progress track, which is a separate project track that tracks the actual success of that project so far. But if an asteroid cube's drawn, then that asteroid's going to be moving an additional space, potentially triggering even more effects. And you may have noticed these face down tiles here on the right hand side of the board, and what these are additional action locations that will become available as the game moves forward, because as the asteroid moves over the icon matching those tiles, that tile is going to get flipped up. But what's really neat about these tiles is that they are randomized at the start of the game, and there's even more than just the 4 tiles you see here, which is going to add a lot of variety from game to game, and that's going to keep the players on their toes, having to use different strategies depending on the different options that come available. But the game continues like this over a series of rounds until the impact of that asteroid is imminent, and then you're going to be checking each of the projects one by one to see if any of them succeed. The way you do this is that you're going to be drawing a number of tokens from the bag, and then any that match the laser first are going to get added to the laser track, but also any asteroid tokens will also get added to that track, helping in its success. If the track is completely full at that time, then it has successfully destroyed the asteroid and it has become the successful project. But if not, then you're going to be putting the blue and green cubes back into the bag and then redrawing. This process continues until you get to that final track, and then you'll be checking the victory points of all the players. Then the player with the most victory points at that point wins the game. And if you are interested in this one, it's definitely one that I recommend. And like I said, I have played it and I do vouch for it, and I think it's a fantastic game. And you can go ahead and click that notify me button in order to get notified of its launch. And this next one I just want to give a quick mention to, but this one's also launching on the 21st, and the reason I'm not going to spend too much time on this one is because this campaign is only for the French version of the game, so if that works for you, you might want to go ahead and check this one out, but all the other languages are scheduled for a campaign next year. So I'll just wait for that and go into the details of this campaign once there's more information and once the other languages are actually available. Also launching on the 21st, we have a new campaign for Thunderstone quests, and this is going to be adding 2 additional quests that you can mix into the game. But if you're not familiar with this one, this is a game that I did cover in the past, and I'll just go ahead and roll that previous footage for you now. And this one is going to be my personal pick of the week for a few reasons. First of all, this is a game that's been around for a while, and you can have a lot of confidence in the design on this one. It's definitely a solid game, and a lot of people really love this one. A 7.9 is nothing to sneeze at. Something that I really like about this game is that even though it is a deck building game, the whole focus isn't on the deck building, and there's a bit of a worker placement element there, and a little bit of a push your luck element as well. I really do enjoy the deck building mechanism, and I do appreciate games like Dominion that are purely focused on deck building, but personally I find it a little exhausting doing that same loop of cycling through your cards over and over again, and I prefer to have my deck building as a portion of the game and not the entire game. And the way that this game blends a few other elements together is that players will be starting with a hand of 12 cards that they'll be able to build throughout the game. But players also start with a side quest card and a guild card, which will give them some special abilities, but also an objective that they can try to achieve early in the game. And on a player's turn, they're going to be drawing 6 cards into their hand, and then they're going to get to decide if they want to visit the village or if they want to visit the dungeon. And if players want to visit the village, there's a little bit of a worker placement element there because you're going to visit a specific spot in the village. And these different locations can help you gain tokens in future turns, upgrade your cards, heal your characters, or even gain new cards to add into your deck. This is interesting because you can do this action and then potentially use none of the cards that you just drew into your hand. But the second half of going to the village is that you can also use any cards that you drew that have a village action on them. Then you can choose to play those cards if you want, but then all your cards will get discarded whether you use them or not at the end of your turn. But if you'd rather go hunt some monsters, you can choose not to go to the village and go into the dungeon instead. And there's different levels to the dungeon, which is represented by the different tiers of cards here located on the right of the board. And players will be spending light from the different cards that they have or light tokens that they collected from the village. And that will help you get deeper into the dungeon. The deeper into the dungeon you go, the more rewarding and challenging monsters you can fight. But the interesting aspect here, and where a little bit of push your luck is introduced into the game, is that you're actually incentivized to stay into the dungeon, because you'll stay at that tier of the dungeon as long as you don't go back to the village. So on your following turn, you don't have to spend those light tokens or cards to get into the deep layers of the dungeon. And that will allow you to get access to those stronger monsters at a lower cost. But of course, the village is where you're going to be going to upgrade your character, heal your character, and get more resources to help you in the dungeon. And you'll be running out of all of that the longer that you stay in the dungeon, so you don't want to stay in there for too long. And the player that has the most victory points from victory points earned by the cards that they collected, as well as experience earned throughout the game, is going to win the game. And launching on May 22nd, we have Degenesis Clan Wars, which is an asymmetric, semi-cooperative, one versus many skirmish wargame. And this is a game where one player is going to be controlling all the enemies, and on their turn they're going to be putting out and controlling these different threat markers out on the board, and each of those represents a different enemy, but the players don't know which enemy that is. These enemies will have different stats for their defense, strength, and range, but they can also have some different abilities as well. The rest of the players are going to be playing as different cult members working together to go up against these threats, and each player is going to have a different character sheet depending on the character that they're playing as, but each character is going to have a normal and primal state that they can change between, and depending on which state you're in, you're going to have different traits and abilities and different strength and defense amounts. This is a game that plays over a series of missions, and players are going to be trying to complete different objectives in order to win that mission. There's different actions that players will be able to perform on their turn in order to move throughout the board, with some areas of the board being more difficult to move through than others depending on the terrain that you're moving through. There's also a scout action that allows players to reveal those threat markers and see which enemy that threat actually is, but in order to do that you're going to have to roll a skill check and get a value higher than the distance between you and that marker. Of course, there are also actions to attack, and in order to do that, you're going to be using a dice pool associated with your weapons, and success is going to be determined by beating at the target's defense value. The neat thing about this game is that there are different dice that you can use during combat that do have varying risks and rewards. There might be some dice with a higher chance of rolling a very high value, but then they could also have a side on the die that completely botches your attack. Players can also choose to add additional dice into their rolls, but anytime that they do that, they're going to be giving a card to their opponent, which is going to grant them with some additional options and abilities that they could use later in the game. The game continues like this until the enemy either defeats all the players or the players are able to complete their objectives. And if you do want to learn more about this, you can go ahead and check it out, and I'll have it linked in the description down below. And launching on the 25th, we have Maleficarum, which is a witch hunting mystery deduction role-playing game, and this is a game that I did cover in the past back when it launched on Kickstarter, but it looks like they're going to be launching it now on Gamefound as well, but I'll just go ahead and roll that previous footage for you now, and you can check it out if you want to learn more. And this one is a role-playing deduction game where players are going to be different villagers, with one of the players being a witch with malicious intent. And the way that this game works is that players are going to be playing over 3 days, and over those days, players are going to be receiving clues and observations from their character's perspective. Players are going to be deciding what of that information they're going to want to keep to themselves and what they might want to share with the other players. Of course, we are dealing with a witch here who is a master of the dark arts, so you can imagine that there's going to be all sorts of different events and unexpected things happening for each of the nights along the way. This could provide additional information as to who that witch is, but it could also mislead the players as well, especially since the witch is among the villagers and also engaging in conversations and intentionally trying to cover up who they actually are. At the end of the game, the players are going to have to decide which player ends up in the pyre, and if that is the witch, then the villagers win the game, but otherwise the witch has the final laugh. And if you are interested in this one, you can check it out. I'll have it linked down below. Also on the 25th, we have Propuh, which is a 2-player dueling game, and I absolutely love the theme of this one because in this game you're either playing as a granny or you're playing as the Propuh, which, if you're not familiar with, is a lovely crosswind that blows through the house. And it seems like there's some superstition around this in Croatia because you may not ever have 2 windows, 2 doors, or a window and a door open at the same time because it could kill you. The granny's going to be using their cards to try and move around and complete their tasks, whereas the Propuh is going to be trying to get in the way of the granny, tire her out, and make her run out of cards, because if that happens, then the granny loses the game, or if the Propuh is able to open a window and a door or 2 windows, then they win the game that way as well. If you want to learn more about this one, you can check it out, and I will have it linked in the description down below. And that's everything I have for you this week, but don't leave yet because we still got a couple awesome giveaways to announce, and these are the easiest giveaways to enter ever. All you got to do is leave a comment down below, and both these giveaways are offered worldwide, so no matter where you are, you can still join in on the fun here. But the first giveaway we have is for a pledge for Feudum, and if you're not familiar with this game, this is a Euro game where players are going to be trying to earn the most victory points at the end of the game, and the way that you're going to be doing that is through a combination of area control and a bunch of other ways to gain victory points. A really neat mechanism in this game is that when you're putting a unit out on the board, you get to choose which side of that unit to put face up in order to gain you influence over a particular faction. And there's a bunch of different factions around the perimeter of the board, and whoever has control of that faction is going to get special access to add and remove items between that faction and the faction that's adjacent to them. Each player can trade with any of these factions to gain different resources or items, or even potentially recruit different monsters. So having some control over the various factions can help you make sure the resources are there when you want it, and potentially not there when your opponents want them. This giveaway is going to be for the Feudum Septennial Edition pledge, and to enter this giveaway, all you got to do is leave a comment down below saying anything that you want, but if you're looking for something in particular, maybe you could tell us what your little faction side hustle is if you have one. For myself, I do actually have a full-time job, which actually would make this my side hustle, I guess, but it does feel a little weird calling it that because this isn't a huge moneymaker, and I do this more for the fun and my love of board games rather than the financial gain, which I just want to say, if you're ever thinking of getting into YouTube for the money, I would pick a niche that has a little bit more money associated with it, like stock investing or luxury watches or financial education or something like that. But if you want something fun, board gaming is a good choice. But our next giveaway is for my pick of the week last week, which is the Amsterdam Board Game Design Season 1, which includes 3 different games, with one of them being a set collection game where you're trying to build different houses, but depending on the cards you put in that house, it's going to determine the way that those cards score. And then we have TimeZoo, which is a game where players are trying to get sets of cards in order to attract different animals to their zoo. And then finally, we have Bable, which is a game where players all speak a different language. And this language is represented by words on cards that you have in your hand, with each of those words being associated with a different action. The cool thing about this is that there's always going to be one player calling the shots, and they're going to have to say the appropriate word in order to make that other player do the appropriate action. This is going to require a little bit of memory and guesswork, because after every single turn, the active player is going to be drawing a new card into their hand, expanding their vocabulary, but also potentially eliminating one of their other cards if the action on that card happens to match one that they already have. And this giveaway is going to be for all 3 games, and all you got to do is leave a comment down below. But if you're looking for something in particular, maybe you let us know what your favorite word is in another language. For myself, I've actually lived in Germany as well as Greece, and I did pick up each of their languages well enough to go out and survive on my own. But in both those languages, there was always one word that got me through so many situations. In Germany, that word is genau, whereas in Greek, that word is akrivos. And you can use these words in any situation, and everyone will think you're a genius. And in English, those words translate to exactly. Good luck in the giveaways, and you can enter both of these with just a single comment, and I don't need to differentiate between the comments using hashtags since these are both offered worldwide. But now let's go ahead and draw the winners for last week's giveaways, which was for a pledge for Lightspeed Arena, as well as Ice Unlimited. And we're going to draw for Lightspeed first, and to draw a winner, I use this fancy application here. All these extra names down here are bonus entries for my Patreon and Ko-fi subscribers. I have since depreciated Patreon, so if you are interested in supporting the channel, I do have a link to my Ko-fi in the description below. And if you want to learn more about why I don't use Patreon, I do have a video up for that as well. But I don't require payment or games from any publishers in order to offer my coverage. I just want to provide the best content to all of you, which is why the Ko-fi makes such a big impact for me and helps me keep this independent. And I would love to see this get to some point of sustainability in the future where I can reduce the amount of time I spend in other areas of my life in order to do more content like this and offer more videos on the channel, because I do have a lot of ideas. I just don't really have the time. And it's always nice to have goals, but let's go ahead and draw the winner of this giveaway. And like I said, this first one is going to be for Lightspeed Arena. So let's go ahead and draw those comments and draw a winner. And the winner of Lightspeed Arena is Paul Beck, who is a subscriber over on Ko-fi. So congratulations on the win and thank you so much for the support so far. I'll reach out to you and let you know that you won yourself a pledge for Lightspeed Arena. But now let's go ahead and draw the comments for Ice. Right, so I paused the video here to remove Paul Beck's name from the entries, which is something that I always do just because I think having those extra entries here does influence the odds. So after a person wins, I go ahead and remove them from the pool here. But I forgot to unpause when I drew the winner, but luckily I didn't close my tab yet, so I still do have the winner here. So we can just go through the motions, and now we're going to go ahead and draw the winner for Ice. And we're just going to go ahead and draw those names, and the winner is Matthew Cox 1593, and he says that for my cold beverage of choice, I would go with an iced coffee or margarita. Congrats on the win and an excellent choice, and if you're looking for a suggestion on a great iced coffee to try, this is one that I learned while I was in Greece, and it is called the Frappe. It's super easy to make, and you can find instructions on how to make it online. It's just spelled Frappe. And it has just been my go-to ever since I learned how to make it. And that's everything I have for you this week. And once again, I am filming this video later than usual, so I do apologize for this one going up later than usual. Luckily, it is a long weekend here in Canada, and I hope that helps me get caught up on some of my other projects. And if you're in Canada, I hope you have an amazing Victoria Day. And for everyone else, I hope you have an amazing weekend as well. But until next time, keep that shelf cluttered and the table full. Thanks so much for watching.